Buddy, it's your non-binary pal Gracious E.V.A here, and welcome back to another traditional speed paint video. Yay! I hope you've been enjoying me doing a bit more of these traditional speed paint videos. I know the lighting in them isn't all that great, but I try to fix them up a little bit in editing. So yeah, the story behind this artwork is really interesting. It's based off of a picture from a how-to watercolor book. I was visiting my grandma's a while back, and we found these old how to draw fantasy watercolor books, and I saw a couple of pictures in there that I thought looked really neat, and I wanted to see if I could draw in sort of my own watercolor style. So you can see here I was showing the picture that I based this one off of. It's a very autumny style picture, and I believe I actually drew this like in the middle of summer, so I don't know what compelled me to draw something super autumny, but hey, perfect for the season now. Yeah, and this one I decided to challenge myself to do only watercolors. I was doing a bunch of artworks that I was doing like watercolor and gouache for, but I decided to stick to just watercolor with this one, and you'll see towards the end I really love how this one turned out. It's one of my favorite watercolor pieces I've done this year. So yeah, let's get to some of the processing behind this one. So of course I did the sketch first, and I've actually discovered a new method of being able to sketch before watercolors that doesn't drive me insane, because I don't know if I've talked about this before, but usually with my watercolor process I'll do the sketch, the rough sketch, then I'll darken up the lines, and then I'll go back and clean up the lighter sketch by erasing it. And I hate that because it takes forever and it drives me crazy, and I feel like I never get it as clean as I want to be. But if you do the rough sketch, or even just like the anatomy in watercolor pencil first, which if you don't know, watercolor pencil is just like watercolor compressed into a colored pencil form. If you sketch with that first, then do your detailing on top of that, you don't even really need to erase, because as soon as you start painting, the watercolor pencil will blend in with the rest of the painting. So yeah, with that technique though, you do have to make sure you choose a color that matches with the rest of your painting, otherwise it might blend together a bit weirdly. Like, don't use a black watercolor pencil to sketch. That's gonna make everything super muddy. And I would recommend to also maybe lighten up the sketch anyway with just like a kneaded eraser if you have one. But yeah, I heard of that tip, and I've been doing that ever since, because it has made watercolor paintings so much easier to get through. But yeah, for this one, I decided to change up the character in it. In the original, it was like a very feminine girl fairy, but I went with a non-binary pixeling type character because I'm me, and of course I did. And they even have some markings on their chest that are kind of alluding to top surgery markings, because I'm me, and that's just what I do. This is what I draw, everyone. If you want more of that, you can stick around, because that's a lot of that on this channel. But yeah, and the background I just sort of loosely sketched, and even in the final product I also kept it very loose and stuff. But while sketching, I knew that I was going to use a lot of warm tone colors and a couple of green too. A little bit of green as well for just a little, because I feel like I use a lot of just warm tone colors and skip out on the green, because green's fine, but it's not my favorite color ever to work with. But I kept it to more of a cooler green as well. And yeah, so once I was done with the sketching and everything, I started with the highlight colors first, since with watercolor you want to work light to dark. And I remembered partway through that I had a golden metallic watercolor in one of my sets, and I decided to actually have that be like their main skin color. Unfortunately, when I put it down, it did turn out like super a lot more transparent than I thought. So I believe I did have to mix it with a little bit of like, oh, just a touch of yellow just to make it a little bit more opaque. And that worked eventually. But yeah, I did that first and then I went on with the rest of the colors. I did a dark red for their hair and I added the green on some of their markings. And then I used this brown color for the branches surrounding them. And yeah, their wings were super interesting as I was kind of replicating them from the original drawing. And it was just a super interesting shape. They're very leaf-like, a lot different than I would normally do, but I like how they turned out in the end. And yeah, the sky gradient in the back was fairly easy to do. I feel like I maybe could have blended it a little bit better, but also I don't mind the more like messy blending that I did. And later on as well, I added in some clouds with a darker yellow. And yeah, the branch tree thing in the background as well, I painted super loosely. Yeah, overall I just kept the background super loose so that the main character would stand out more. For the shading went pretty interesting. I was actually struggling a little bit not to make it super dark. I was placing down the color, it went on too dark, so I had to remove it, try again, and hope that it didn't bleed everywhere. There were a couple parts in the hair where I did that, but I was able to cover it up pretty well. I mostly stuck to red and purple for the shadow color. Don't know why, because there's no other purple in this, but with watercolor, colors like that can like blend a little bit better with the rest of the subject. Unlike with digital, where if I did this with my normal way of doing like just a normal layer for the main shadow, it would look purple and that wouldn't make much sense with the rest of the environment. But with here, because watercolors are more transparent, it actually blended a lot better and it really doesn't look that purple. And like I said too, I also used red. For the eyes, I decided to bring back that metallic golden color and have their eyes be like a gradient of red to gold, and I really like how that looks. Their eyes being just one big scalar, all the scalar, no irises. I do that a lot. It's actually a lot easier to paint with watercolor. I still don't have a good grasp of how to paint irises with watercolor or many other traditional mediums that aren't digital. Like, I can do it in my normal comic style, but with full-on illustrations like this, I feel like I want to do like my more shiny eye method. But watercolor and marker, the two traditional art mediums that I frequently use, are transparent, pretty transparent, and you have to work light to dark, where typically with my eyes, I work the exact opposite, light to dark, because that's easier. But yeah, other than that, doing it this method worked a lot better, and I didn't have to worry about that. But yeah, I also decided to add a touch of green towards the bottom of the branches surrounding them. You can maybe consider these branches as like a cocoon or something, I'm not sure. But yeah, I really like their hairstyle in this. I added a bunch of tiny braids, which I was worried that the braids in their hair would get lost with the painting and I wouldn't be able to figure out where they were with lining them, but I was able to figure that out, and I added a little branch in their hair too. And yeah, and I was happy to see that the highlights were not disappearing, because a lot of times I feel like I'll put the highlights down first, but then they get washed away with all the rest of the colors accidentally. But here, they're still there. They're still prominent. You can see them especially in the hair. In the skin, they're not as prevalent because their skin is also a light yellow color. So, but yeah, I did like the shading on this, and it took a little bit, but once I was done with the painting, I went on to line it with one of my colored pens. I believe I used a brown for this, a brown or a dark red, but seeing as how it's pretty dark, I think I remember using a brown for this, which worked well with the piece, obviously. And then, yeah, so once I was done with everything, lining went well, lining was fine. And something else I've noticed with lining watercolor paintings like this, because the painting will get very textured because of the way the paint's dry, it can mess up your brushes or your pens depending of what you're using. I've lined things with just my normal black pens before, and some of them have gotten a bit messed up. Some of the nibs have gotten like broken or cracked because of the texture on the painting. However, these colored pens I've used, which I've talked about before in my past traditional art speed paint, I find that yes, they will get a little bit grainy at the nibs, but if you like clean them off on another scrap piece of paper, it keeps working just fine. So yeah, if you have pens like that, that you know can get like pretty like grainy towards the ends of the nibs when you're lining watercolor paintings with them, try like doing that method. If it doesn't work, maybe don't use those pens to line watercolors, because that might not be a good method. But yeah. So funny story, once I was done lining everything, I had everything held down with painter's tape so that I would get clean edges and that the paper wouldn't get too like curled up. But when I was taking off the paint on one of the sides, it ripped the page in a way that it affected the painting, which, oops. But we were able to fix it by getting that that ripped paper, kind of glue it down with water, like water it down, sort of like Mod Podge. I paint over it again with the same brown there, hold it down with some books overnight, and it was completely fine. Don't look too closely. It's not there. No, it's fine. We're fine. But yeah, luckily it was only like a super small portion and in the background too. Otherwise I would have sucked. But yeah, other than that little mishap, everything was done and it turned out great. I hope you enjoyed this speed paint. This was fun to work on, fun to make, and I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, all my normal social stuff in the links below, all the normal things. I think you're familiar with them at this point. If you're not, then look in the description. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Have a happy fall time. I feel like I posted this at a really good time for fall, because that's good. Yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye!